How to cure mental disorders.
Asking you, when did you know that you were depressed? When did you start calling it depressed? And why did you, this fantastical woman on our screens, decide to go public with something so personal?
I think it started with just a feeling. It started with just a feeling of not being completely there, of feeling like, um, like we spoke about that pittish feeling in your stomach where, and just breaking down for no reason. And truly just feeling completely lost and not understanding what was happening to me. And I think it was the intervention of my mother, who was visiting me at that time. And I think I lived with it for a while, actually. I was filming a movie at that time, and I had no idea what I was going through. And I'd go to work every day. I'd literally have to pull myself out of bed and go to work. And my mother just happened to visit me, completely different context. And the day she was leaving, I remember breaking down. And I was extremely surprised, actually, today when I think back at how aware she was of what I was going through. And the first thing she did was to call a family friend, and Anna Chandy, who's a counselor. But today, when I think back, and of course, I was hesitant at that point because I wasn't aware of what I was going through. And at the same time, for me, Anna is someone who's also a family friend. So I think that's where I sought comfort. But at the same time, I don't know if I would have done the same thing if I didn't have, sort of that comfort level. But it was my mother who really sort of identified the symptoms and immediately called her up. And in one phone conversation with Anna, she sort of understood what I was going through. But at the same time, I think it's the way she dealt with me and with the situation at that point. She didn't raise any alarms. She made me feel like it was completely normal and okay, and that we will get through this. And then, of course, with her and Dr. Shan Bhatt, who, have worked on me, you know, so I think initially I was also reluctant to take medication. But I think at one point I was just extremely exhausted. I couldn't do it anymore. And I think that's when I decided to sort of, I said, okay, let me start medication. Let me accept this help that people are willing to give me. And today there's a lot more awareness. I don't think I can say that I'm completely over it, but it's always a fear at the back of my mind that I might always have a relapse because it's been such a bad experience for me.
What was the most, I mean, I remember you telling me that you felt that pit in your stomach, you felt empty, you felt directionless,
Yeah.
that you would lock yourself in your vanity van and sometimes just cry, and you did not know why you were crying. That sometimes it helped to have people around, but sometimes it was the exact opposite. That sense of being closed in by a crowd when you're feeling isolated within yourself.
Yeah. It helped having people I was close to and familiar with. It was comforting to have them around because then I could break down if I felt like, and if I had questions or thoughts in my head, I wouldn't hesitate to ask. But at the same time, if I was in front of the media or at an event, which happened many, many times, that's when I'd feel a bit suffocated because I didn't want to break down in public. And this is before I made up my mind to go public with what I was dealing with. Today, if that happens to me, if I ever go back to that space, and I hope I don't, I don't think I'd think twice about exposing the way I feel. And I think a large part of one's road to recovery is to accept what you're going through, and to not challenge it, but to embrace it. And to actually allow your body and your mind to go through that experience and know that there is a road ahead. that will get you out of all of this. And it's not an individual, I don't think I could have done it on my own. I think it's very important to have that support system. So while, people credit me for coming out and speaking out, I think it's equally important for caregivers to acknowledge, and for us to acknowledge that it's important for them to be with us on this journey.
Now, before I get Dr. Doraiswamy in, I want you to talk a little bit about the continued stigma. The continued stigma associated with mental health issues, with depression in particular. Even today, if I were to be honest, in terms of eliciting responses here, even in this room with very educated, very aware people, in drawing rooms you will hear loose and idle chatter saying, oh, why is Deepika depressed? She has everything. She has money. She's fame. She has talent. She's going places. She's, depression is treated as a indulgence. Like, only people who have no real problems are depressed. So when you came out in that conversation and millions of people saw it online, on television, read about it, were you worried that the people were going to be horribly mean? And were some people horribly mean?
No. I don't think anyone was mean, but I didn't even think about it. I didn't think about the repercussions. I think
you didn't have a moment of how will this impact my public image?
No, not at all. I think for me, the idea really was to just change the way people in India and in the world look at mental illness and, give it the respect that it needs. I think the idea really was to just change the conversation, because I had experienced like literally a pre and post. And I lived with it for a couple of months without sharing it with anyone. And then today I feel so much lighter and so much better when I've come out and I've spoken about my journey. And I know a lot of other people who do. There's not a single day where I've probably not met someone who has come up to me and said, thank you for sharing the story. But what's also helped them is the fact that they've then shared their story with someone saying, I know what Deepika's been through because I'm going through the exact same thing, and they instantly feel a lot lighter.
What was the toughest thing about that phase of your life? Was it feeling like nobody's going to understand? Was it the sense of losing control? Was it the sense of, surrendering almost? Like you almost have to surrender to it before you can get better. You can't fight it. A lot of people think it's mind over matter, but actually depression is matter of a kind, and I'm going to talk to the doc about it in a second. But what was the toughest thing about that phase of your life?
The phase itself. I think before the intervention, I think before I understood, before my mother saw it, before anyone else saw it, to have to wake up every morning, to drag myself to work, to put on this face like everything's okay, when deep down inside I had no reason why I was where I was and what I was doing. And life just, it felt like there was no purpose. I didn't feel like, it made absolutely no sense. Just life made no sense. So for me, I think that was the toughest part.
And Murli, that can be staggeringly lonely. The thing about depression is it's this kind of chicken and egg thing, right? You're already feeling like shit inside. You're feeling what Deepika calls that pit in your stomach. And then you feel like if you share it, she was, I think, in a way lucky because she had this really supportive therapist, because we think we'll be judged.
That's right.
Even though 36% of this country, according to the World Health Organization, is depressed.
Yeah.
Yep. So, like you, and I can't imagine a better champion than you. So,
thank you.
I want to point a few things about statistics that you alluded to. Depression and mental disorders are now the leading cause of disability in the world. And they are soon going to become the #2 cause of death in the next 10 years or so. In India, something like 150 million people have mental disorders, and especially amongst youth. I think in the previous session, Karan said that roughly half of India's population is under the age of 25, and our country depends on them for all of the accomplishments it's going to make. There is one suicide every hour in that age bracket, making India maybe one of the leading suicide countries for the average person with mental illness to even be sort of recognize that they have the symptoms to seek help. And we have something like a 10 to 30-fold shortage of mental health professionals in this country. So even if somebody recognizes that they need help, it's very hard for someone living in the rural areas or someone who's poor coming from sort of the marginalized sections of society to find the right care and treatment.
Can you not treated as seriously as another illness which is more physically identifiable, maybe? Like one of the things that Deepika mentioned was that she resisted medication. Now that is a very, very, common response. I mean, I remember I used to get anxiety attacks, and when my doctor told me, you need to go on medication, I said, no, I don't want medications, messing with my brain. Now, this is a standard response, and I was having this response as an educated, aware journalist, right? So what intrigues me about the battle against depression is we are not able to cross that collective psychological barrier where even everybody sitting around me, the first instinct is this happens to other people. Hey, why would I be depressed? This happens to other people.
Yeah. So I think Tipper Gore, Al Gore's wife, suffered from depression, and she described depression as the greatest stigma of the 21st century. There's two elements of that stigma. The stigma of depression is unlike the stigma of any other physical illness. One is there's a self-stigma.
Yeah.
You yourself feel bad and you think it's a weakness. And that sort of almost spreads to others around you, your family and your friends, and they don't want to talk about it, and they kind of hide the problem until they get burnt out themselves, and then you're forced to seek help. So it's a twofold, and depression affects the core of who we are as human beings, our emotions, or just our personality, our cognition, all of that, and that's, I think, explains why the stigma has been so great. And I think things like what Deepika's foundation is doing, education, is really the core of overcoming stigma, especially education at younger age groups. And I think PM Modi, in one of his radio addresses, said, very simple, expression rather than suppression. And I think Deepika, she has done that by talking about it, by spreading the word, by educating people, especially in the youth. That's the key, I think, to overcoming stigma.
I want to come to the science of it in a moment, but I want you to talk a little bit about two things. One, I remember you telling me that at that phase when you slipped into this depression without knowing necessarily that it was depression, you had lost a very close friend. And I remember you told me that, again, you thought, or you didn't know that this friend was depressed. And that if this friend could do this to him, in terms of not thinking his life was worth living, just imagine how many other people around you might be living with that. So can you speak a little bit to how losing that friend maybe, in a sense, began your own journey of self-discovery of what you were going through? I'm not saying that was the cause of your depression.
Yeah.
I'm saying it probably helped you to uncover it.
Well, he was a friend of a friend, and for me, someone I had met socially many, many times. But I think that was when I decided to sort of speak up and to do something about it, because I was seeing so many people around me. Now that's just one instance. We wake up today, we read the papers every single day. There's a headline. And my heart aches because it's preventable. It's absolutely preventable. And I think a large part of also the stigma comes from the fact that in schools, we talk about physical education. We have physical education classes. I had physical education in my school. But we didn't have anything to talk about mental health. Not one session, not a class, it's not part of the curriculum. So I think if we included that in the curriculum and we introduce just the idea of the importance of mental health at a school level, there will be no stigma, because it's the same way as a child you're educating me about so many other things. So educate me about the importance of mental health the same way we talk about the importance of physical health. But yes, I think it was that one experience, but it was many other, of course my own experience, and then to see someone who I'd known for so many years, and like I said, you see it all around you, and I've been there. So it hurts to know that maybe in a matter of moments, or maybe some sort of intervention by friends or a family member, or maybe that moment could have passed and maybe things would have been very different today.
And we're actually talking about saving lives here. We're not talking about something self-indulgent. We're talking about suicide. We're talking about people who feel, and this happened to your friend or friend of a friend, but you yourself had reached that perilous point where you were like, I don't want to get out of bed and go through my day. This life doesn't make sense to me. And that is an isolating, and actually it's a very dangerous, I want to underline how dangerous that sentiment is.
It is. I think it's so important, having been there, I think it's so important to identify that moment in your life and to not fight it. It's so important to just accept, embrace, talk to somebody about it. I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't mind if it's wrong diagnosis. I don't mind if I feel like I'm depressed, but I actually go to a doctor and he feels, or a specialist feels, I'm not depressed. I'd rather be in that space than underestimate what I'm going through. When we have a fever, we don't think twice about, I'm not talking about medication necessarily, but when we have a fever, when we have a cold, when we don't hesitate to pick up the phone and talk to someone, or casually mention to someone that I'm feeling feverish today, my throat is aching today. So why don't we talk about how my mind is feeling? I'm not feeling well today. I'm physically fine, but my mind's not there. Why can't we talk about it the same way?
So why did you resist the medication? And the reason I'm pushing you on this is because I know Dr. Doraiswamy will bear
that what if I'm already not feeling great, and what if this thing messes with my mind even more? It was just the stigma, nothing else. And the day I overcame that, I'm fine.
So how do we know if we're depressed?
Great question.
And not just sad.
No, it's a great question. So I think what most people don't realize is that clinical depression is not just your everyday blues or everyday passing sadness. We all encounter moments of sort of blues, rejections in our work, family life, accomplishments, playing tennis, you lose to somebody. Yeah, we are all sad. But most of those kinds of everyday blues, we're able to snap out of it in a few days, in a few hours. Clinical depression is far more serious, far more debilitating. Typically, we define clinical depression in medical terms as someone having 5 or more symptoms of depression for most of the day, for at least 2 weeks. And these symptoms are impairing your everyday functioning, both at work and in your family life. So Google recently put out a screening questionnaire on their search tool called the PHQ-9. It's a validated depression screening tool. It's not a diagnostic test, so you cannot diagnose yourself with depression. And hundreds of thousands of people have already taken this screening tool. It's not available in India yet. All it tells you is if you score low, then your mood symptoms are probably just benign everyday blues adjustment to life stressors. If you're scoring on the high end, it's time, as Deepika pointed out, to go seek professional help. It may be depression, it may not be depression. A variety of medical conditions can also mimic depression. Thyroid imbalances, vitamin deficiencies, in the elderly, small strokes, medication side effects. One reason why people don't want to take drugs is many older antidepressants carry a lot of baggage with them. In fact, a new study just came out that antidepressants double your risk for death on their own. So that's the sort of...
So then what do we do?
Well, so medication is not the solution necessarily for depression. So milder forms of depression can be treated with therapy, can be treated with yoga, exercise, lifestyle changes, environment changes, family support, reducing isolation. There's a variety of things that one can do.
But you mentioned...
For example, people who just spend an enormous amount of time just on certain types of video games, you can tell by the color of the Instagram photos whether someone is depressed or not depressed.
Explain that.
Just people who have depression or who are going to get depression 3 to 4 months from now tend to post darker, more muted colors on Instagram. They don't tend to use the brighted colors. A study just came out like about a week ago. It's not yet, of course, these are not diagnostic tests, but what I'm saying is we have a two-way relationship with technology. Anyone who just spends over too much time with the internet.
That's everyone here.
Well, not just...
We are all depressed by that.
No.
That screening test, we're all failing.
No, that's causing sleep problems, which is going to lead to cognitive impairment and dementia late in life.
Yeah.
So let's not worry about that. That'll be another session. So kids really who are isolated, they're locking themselves up in their room, they're spending an enormous amount of time with video games, those kinds of things. Yes, one needs to consider whether this is worrisome or not. You parents need to really look at what kinds of games they're playing. If they're violent games, if they're all leading to the blue whale kind of thing, then sure, there's risk-taking. Teenage brains are not fully developed. So that's where I think one needs to be worried. On the other hand, I think technology can have a positive role because one, you can increase the access to counseling, and I'm sure your foundation is going to use technology for education. Eventually, we're going to have apps. There's a company in India called Wysa that's developed a chatbot to treat depression, and they've done a pilot trial with it, and it actually helps people. So, as I mentioned, we don't have enough counselors. So we can use technology in a positive way to educate children, maybe create gaming, maybe create empathy by having virtual reality experiences where they can understand what it feels like to be depressed. I want to see for once what it's like to be depressed, and she's able to like put a few pulses through her brain and spend 6 hours in a state of depression to see what depression feels like.
And why is this a good thing to have?
No,
this
I'm just
app
saying,
if it exists?
I'm not saying, what I'm saying is if you can cultivate empathy, one of the ways of cultivating empathy is to understand what the other person is going to go through. If there is a way for you to understand better what the other person is going through, then sure, that reduces the stigma.
Deepika, when you first started taking treatment, and and I'm saying even before the medication, did you find it really difficult to not outsmart your therapist? Talk a little bit about that process of getting help and the obstacles you had to jump over within yourself.
I think for me, there was the stigma before.
Not once you started.
Yeah, but Barka, once I made up my mind, once I decided that, I'm done. I can't live like this anymore, and I want to get better. I need to get better. And then it was a deep dive. There's no halfway. I don't know if there is, but it wasn't for me. So the day I decided to then seek help and speak about it, and speak to my parents, speak to my sisters, speak to my doctors, then I'd share everything with them. So there was no
barriers, no holding back?
No. Every question that they asked, everything they wanted to know, past, present, whatever they wanted to know, I shared everything with them. Working at that point, I was like, why can I not tell someone when someone asks me how am I doing? Like the film that you just saw before we came in is, I think what got to me was when people were asking me how are you doing? And one day I thought, are they really asking me how I'm doing? Do they actually have the time to listen if I said I'm not feeling okay? Will they actually give me that moment and understand what I'm going through, or
is it just perfunctory?
Is it just superficial? When we ask people, how are you doing? Is it just superficial? Is it just, formality because that's the way we've been brought up? Like just ask and, yeah, I'm fine. Oh, great. Everything's great. Is everything really okay? And I wasn't okay. So I think that's what really got to me, because I wasn't okay. And it reached a stage where I was like, why can't I just tell people that I'm not okay? It was just that. And that's when I reached out, and that's when I felt like I needed to talk about it. I felt like, because I felt bottled, I felt caged, I felt like I needed to fly or swim or just not be boxed and to feel free, and I feel so free today.
Fantastic. There are plenty of foundations. There's Banyan, there is Spark, there is Deepika's foundation. I think education is going to be very important, setting in policies that are anti-discriminatory against people with mental illnesses, encouraging employees to volunteer, because volunteering itself builds resilience against future mental illnesses, making available resources for people to get care and accurate diagnosis and treatment, giving appropriate vacation, and making sure when they come back from the treatment of their illness that their career trajectory is not shifted indeed.
Directly as these Western imports into
Right.
our country. So I want you to speak briefly on that and Actually, I'm seeing Anna Chandy here, who's actually Deepika's counselor, so I want to bring her into the conversation.
Sure.
But just on that thing of the cultural dimension.
Culture is very important, and
Yeah.
all treatment and diagnosis has to be culture appropriate. There are many, many psychiatric disorders that would be viewed as abnormal in one culture that are normal in another culture. I'll give you an example, which is somewhat not pertinent here, but there's a condition called Williams syndrome, where people are born with this genetic condition. They don't discriminate at all. They treat individuals of all races as equal. Of course, in countries where there's a lot of racial discrimination, that would be seen as a good thing. In America, for example, people see people with Williams syndrome as something very great. In other countries where there's sharp class distinctions, people see Williams syndrome kids as like
So
very
apply
abnormal.
that to depression.
So depression has to be treated in a cultural context.
Yeah.
You cannot treat depression outside of the culture. You have to diagnose it.
But
and treat
sometimes
it.
you have to push the boundaries of what is culture appropriate as well,
Sure.
right? It was not part of Indian urban culture even 20 years ago to go and see a therapist.
Right.
But today there is a greater acceptance, so culture is not static either.
Sure. But that's not to say that American or Western psychotherapy is the only solution. There is a variety of Indian and hybrid techniques that are very important if someone believes in the Bhagavad Gita. People may not realize Bhagavad Gita was the original psychotherapy session, the crisis psychotherapy session, right? So yoga, meditation, all of those are very powerful. I think it's a misconception that you have to go with the Western psychotherapy.
Yeah.
We've done studies, others have done studies that yoga is just as effective. And there's a variety of other techniques as well.
It's an entire lifestyle change, if
Correct.
I may say. My life, literally pre and post, my life post-depression is very, very different from my life before.
What's the biggest difference?
I take care of myself, and I don't feel guilty about
But
it.
didn't you always, like as an actor, take care of yourself? Or do you mean beyond physically taking care of yourself?
It's absolutely not in terms
Related
of
to-
physical appearance, but it's important to... and especially with women in India, I feel that there's a lot of guilt
Yeah.
attached with taking care of yourself and doing things for yourself, because we're constantly playing roles and constantly doing things for other people. And the minute you take that 1 hour off because you want to go and see your friends for lunch,
Yeah.
there's suddenly so much guilt. We're very, very open to the idea. And in fact, we've covered, I think, more than 300 schools in the last 1 year. But it's surprising that a lot of schools don't
Resist it.
encourage. Yes. They
That's
It'll
resist.
change.
It's a bit of a confusing question. Yeah.
Do I feel comforted when somebody asks me?
So in the book, they say that one shouldn't actually say, I know exactly how you feel.
Oh, okay.
Ah.
All right, got it.
That's true.
So do you feel people got you with empathy, or do you feel like they're patronizing you? Like they don't exactly know how
I
you
can
feel?
tell the difference. I can look into their eyes and know.
tell.
You can tell. You can tell when someone's genuinely reaching out because they know, either they understand, they're empathetic, and they know genuinely what I've probably gone through, or they know someone who's been through the similar experience. And then there are the ones who are...
Just faking it. All right, I'm afraid we do have to close it there. I'm getting the signal that we do have to wrap.
If you found this information valuable, give it a thumbs up and share with your community, and subscribe for more health insights. Thanks for watching and take care of yourself. Until next time, stay healthy.